Gave up my son 12 years ago due to my mental health. Now I hope for a cautious reconnection from afar. 14 years ago, I was married and became a father to a beautiful baby boy. At that time, though, my life was a wreck. Shadows of my traumatic childhood loomed large over me, and they took a devastating toll. I suffered from severe depression, which I foolishly left untreated. My emotions were a tangled mess. I struggled with anger, and sometimes I turned to drugs to numb the pain. I couldn't take care of myself, let alone a little one, even though I loved him more than anything. Connecting with people felt impossible, and every day I failed at being the father I wished I could be. I couldn't hold down a job, regardless of the skills I had, and money was always tight. My wife tried to carry me through my darkest hours, but it was too much. I don't blame her, it was overwhelming. Eventually, she left, taking our son with her, and filed for divorce when he was about 2 years old. She got full custody. I'll be the first to admit, it was absolutely the right thing for our boy. Even though I would have never harmed him, I couldn't provide the safety, care, or emotional stability he deserved. After she left, she found someone new, a good, stable man. I knew him a little, and honestly, knowing my son was in a loving home was a small comfort amid my personal chaos. I didn't try hard to see my son during those early years. I was lost in my downward spiral and convinced he was better off without me, which now I see may not have been true. Still, back then, my judgment was clouded by pain and confusion. I always managed to pay some child support, though it wasn't much. Then came the day that changed everything. My ex agreed to meet me in a bar to talk. The conversation didn't go as I hoped. I lost control, started yelling, and when a man tried to intervene, I ended up fighting with him outside. My ex was terrified. The man let it go, seeing what a broken person I was, but for my ex, that was the last straw. She told me I could never see our son again and took out a restraining order against me. I respected that restraining order. She was convinced I was dangerous, and, remembering her own father's anger, she wasn't going to risk history repeating itself. It gutted me, but I understood. She eventually convinced me to relinquish my parental rights so that her new husband could adopt my boy. At the time, I was convinced it was the best thing for him. He would grow up in a stable, loving home, and maybe he'd even forget me and all that pain. Letting him go was like having my heart torn from my chest, but I figured it was a small price for his happiness. I faded out of his life completely after that. Years slipped by, each day hurting more than the last. I battled through the darkness, sometimes wanting it all to end. And then, somehow, help found me. I dug deep, faced my demons, and slowly rebuilt myself. Piece by piece, I turned my life around, something I used to think was impossible. Through all those years, though, missing my son has never gotten any easier. Wondering about him, what he's doing, what kind of person he's become, helped push me through even on the worst days. Now, having finally put my life together, I only want to do what's right for him. I want him to know that I'm here if he ever needs me, not to disrupt his world, but to let him know that I never stopped caring. But I'm haunted by the thought that my attempt to reach out could cause pain or chaos for him or his family. I have no idea what, if anything, he knows about me. I long to ask his mother what she feels about all this. What has she told him about me? Should I stay away for good, or is there a chance he might want to know the truth someday? But the restraining order is still in place, and I won't break the law, not now, not when I've finally regained some stability and found a good job I could lose for something like this. I've made so many mistakes, and I own every single one. I know I wasn't there for my son, and it's all my fault. I don't even have a legal right to call myself his father anymore. That knowledge stings every single day, but I carry it, hoping somehow it isn't too late for a second chance, if not as a father, at least as someone who cares deeply for him, from a distance. Update 1. As you advised me, I got myself a lawyer. He looked into things and confirmed what I never thought possible. The restraining order was actually expired and had been for quite some time. For the first time in years, I realized I was actually free to reach out to my son's mother. I could finally ask her if my son even knows about me, and whether she would allow me to write to him. Thank you so much. Maybe you don't realize it, but your advice gave me the shot of confidence I desperately needed. I'd been stuck for so long, convinced there was no hope, that the restraining order was an iron wall I couldn't break through. But now, I can finally move forward. The next step is far from easy, and I'm praying my ex-wife will take it well when I reach out after all this time. But hope has returned, and I'm ready to see what comes next. Update 2. I wrote a letter to my ex-wife. I'll spare you the details, but in it I laid my soul bare, apologizing for everything I'd done, taking full responsibility for how things had turned out. I told her about all the work I've put into changing myself, getting my act together after those dark years. Still, I pointed out that all she had was my word for it, and I understood that it wasn't much to offer. I asked if she'd tell me how she and my son were doing, if she could share even a glimpse of his life. I wondered if he knew about me and if, someday, she might consider letting me contact him. I made it clear that I wouldn't make any more attempts if she didn't want to hear from me, or if she asked me to stop. I honestly didn't expect to get an answer, but to my surprise, she wrote back, a long, deeply emotional letter. Her words floored me. She told me she'd forgiven me and that she's glad to hear I'm doing better. She shared that she, my son, and her husband are all doing well. My son is thriving, happy, doing great at school, surrounded by friends. She described him as mature for his age, already knowing what he wants out of life. He enjoys a strong bond with his mother, his adoptive father, and his siblings. I can't describe the relief I felt reading all this. To know my son is doing so well, it's more than I dared to hope for, and it eased a weight I've carried for years. She told me I was right to let him be adopted, no matter how difficult it was. I always suspected that, but seeing her say it comforted me in a way I hadn't expected. My son knows he's adopted, he knows why his mother left with him, and why he's never met me. Other than that, he doesn't know much about me. He's asked a few questions through the years, and his mother has always answered honestly. She assured me she's never badmouthed me, and I believe her. When it comes to the possibility of contact in the future, she told me she'd consider it, but it would be a family decision, something she and her husband would need to discuss together, and then talk to my son to see what he wants. If that time ever comes, she and her husband will want to talk to me as well, to assess for themselves whether I've truly changed. She asked me to be patient, she doesn't want to rush anything. But she promised that, regardless of the outcome, she won't keep me in the dark. Now all I can do is wait. Knowing my son is living a good life, happier than I ever dared dream, is a blessing I never expected to have. Even if it never goes further than this, there's a little hope now, and for me, that's enough. Update 3. Over the last few months, amazing things have happened in my life. A few weeks after my ex-wife first responded to my letter, she reached out again with a second letter and said she'd be willing to meet with me to talk. I honestly never thought she'd want to do that, especially because the last time we saw each other, I had terrified her so much. But we arranged to meet, our first meeting in almost 12 years. We chose a coffee shop, and, needless to say, emotions ran high from the moment we sat down. Yet the conversation flowed, and we ended up staying there all afternoon, finally unpacking everything that had been weighing on us for so long. In person, I was finally able to apologize for everything I had put her through. I opened up about the years of darkness and suffering that had consumed me, explaining what caused those dark times, the struggle to find my way out, and the progress I've made since. She told me again that she forgives me. She said she understands how much pain I was in, and how difficult it all must have been, and even admitted that a part of her had never stopped worrying about what happened to me. It meant so much to hear her say that. She shared what her life had been like since, about our son, and about her 2 kids with her second husband. They're a wonderful family, and I'm truly grateful knowing my son is growing up surrounded by so much love and happiness. We talked with open hearts, both of us crying a lot, but those tears seemed to release something inside us. I think it did us both a world of good. The weeks after that first meeting, I met 2 more times with my ex and her husband to talk about the possibility of contacting my son. Together, they agreed that I really was a changed person, that I had my act together, and that I'd done the work to get somewhere in life. They told me they were willing to trust me, and I can't express how grateful I am for that chance. Just a few months ago, I wouldn't have even dreamed of such an opportunity. I made sure to thank them for keeping me informed about my son, for telling me about his life. Not knowing where he was, or how he had been all these years, while I understood why, had been so hard for me. From what my ex-wife and her husband told me, my son had been asking questions in the last couple of years about why he was adopted. They explained to him that his mom had to leave and take him with her, that I wasn't able to be a father at that time because of my issues, and that I gave up my parental rights so his stepdad could raise him as his own. They told him the honest truth, didn't sugarcoat anything, and kept everything out in the open with him. He asked them once if they knew what had become of me, but they didn't know at that time. After we reconnected, they decided to tell him that we'd been in contact, and asked how he felt about it. His reaction was surprisingly positive. He said it was cool. They told him that I'd asked if I could write a letter to him, but only if he felt comfortable, with absolutely no pressure or expectation attached. He discussed it with his friends and decided he'd be okay receiving a letter from me. Now I'm sitting here, trying to write that letter. Actually, I've written and ripped up probably 30 versions of it so far. In it, I thank him for letting me reach out, and let him know that I love him, that I'm there for him if he has questions about me, or why I couldn't raise him, or anything else. I make it clear that he's under no obligation to answer me, or say or do anything. After all, from his point of view, I am just a stranger. I'm not asking for anything, and if he doesn't want any more contact, I'll respect that. But if he ever needs me, I'll be there for him. I can't begin to express how thankful I am that things have turned out this way, that I finally have a chance to contact my son. Just 6 months ago I wouldn't have dared hope for something like this. I feel better now than I ever have. Being able to talk with my ex-wife brought me an incredible sense of peace. I've shed tears of relief nearly every day these past weeks. I didn't even realize how much I needed this. For the first time in as long as I can remember, I feel whole. Even just writing this leaves me with a deep sense of gratitude and healing. Update 4. After many long, difficult discussions with my ex-wife and her husband, I finally summoned the courage to write a letter to my son. I kept it brief, just the essentials. I told him I was his biological dad, and that, as he'd learned from his parents, I'd given him up for adoption because of issues I struggled with at the time. I shared a few details about my life, where I live, my job, my girlfriend. I made sure he knew I was there if he wanted to write back or ask questions, but also promised that if he didn't want contact, I'd quietly disappear from his life and wouldn't bother him again. Then, I waited. 3 weeks passed before I heard anything, and when a response finally came, it wasn't what I expected at all. One evening, my son texted me out of the blue. He wanted to say hello and wish me a happy new year. The texts were casual, simple, just small talk, but they meant the world to me. I had left my phone number in my letter just in case, but honestly, I imagined that if he ever wanted to talk, he'd write a letter, too. I thought I'd have time to think through my response, but with texts, everything happened fast. I had to answer right away and not let my emotions take over. Over the next few weeks, we exchanged texts a handful of times. I'm grateful for how direct he is. He's not shy about asking questions. He wants to know where I come from, more about my family, my own childhood. Some of those questions are tough for me, since I have no family left and my own childhood was a nightmare. I've kept the worst details from him for now. I don't want to disturb him, at least not until he's ready. Then, out of nowhere one day, he texted. He wanted to meet me in person. This was before the pandemic hit. He said texting was fine, but he'd really like to see what I look like. I never saw that coming. Honestly, I thought maybe someday he'd want a phone or Skype call, but to meet so soon? That surprised me. He told me his parents were okay with it. I couldn't help but think that maybe they'd been saying some good things about me. We arranged to meet at a state park, my son, his parents, his siblings, and me. We went hiking, had a picnic. At first, I was a ball of nerves. I didn't know what to expect, but the day went incredibly well. I even managed not to cry, though I'd been sure I would. Mostly, we talked about his life, his hobbies, sports, school, all the things that matter in a teenager's world. He asked me about my job, my home, my interests, even about my girlfriend. Not once did things feel awkward, which had been a huge fear of mine. It was so clear to see how smart he is, and how strong his relationship is with his parents and siblings. They're a loving, stable family, exactly what I hoped he'd have when I gave up my rights. We didn't really talk about why I had to let him go for adoption, or the years when I was at my lowest. For now, those details can wait. He knows a little, thanks to his mom, but not everything. When he's ready, we'll talk about it. That day left me deeply grateful, just to have the chance to meet him. My son said he hoped we could meet again soon, so he could get to know me better. Hearing that made me incredibly happy. I hope one day he'll get to meet my girlfriend, soon to be my wife. The pandemic has gotten in the way of that for now, but I know we'll find our way back together again. Until then, we text regularly and sometimes Skype. I've also set up a trust fund for him, to help if and when he goes to college. I don't plan on having any more children, and I can afford to do this. It feels right. I brought him into the world, and even if I didn't raise him, I still feel responsible. Maybe one day, if things go well, he'll invite me to his graduation. That would be a dream come true. Meeting my son brought an unexpected sense of closure. I needed that more than I realized. Our relationship will require careful navigation, but I'm confident we'll find our way, and that there's so much more ahead for us. At 49, I recently married a woman I truly love. She's 43, and has a daughter from when she was 16. She spent years struggling as a single mom. Now she wants a life, time to work, to have fun, to enjoy the freedom she missed out on. We've both made it clear, no kids for us. I have my son, though technically he isn't mine anymore. He was adopted by his stepdad because, back then, I just wasn't capable of raising him. And yet, people around us keep asking when we'll have children together, insisting it would be cute, or saying we'll feel the call at some point. One of my wife's acquaintances even warned her that I'd start demanding a kid, like all men do. It baffles me. We're both past 40. We know what we want, and, more importantly, what we don't want. When my son was 2, his mom and I divorced. She married someone else, and I gave up my rights so he could be adopted by his stepdad. At the time, I couldn't even take care of myself, let alone a child. I had severe PTSD and depression. After giving him up, I honestly thought he wouldn't miss me if I died. Suicide felt like the only way out. After an attempt, I ended up in the hospital. A friend visited me, angry and upset. He told me, "You fucking moron, what happens when your son grows up and asks who his real dad is? He has the right to know who you are." My therapist at the hospital said something similar, that my son might have questions about me one day, and it would be better if I was there to answer them. Things didn't magically get better, but at least in my worst moments, that sense of duty to my son would sometimes keep me going. It took years of therapy, but slowly, I got better, and, eventually, I even found new purpose. I'm so grateful that I lived long enough to meet my son again after all those years. And I'm grateful, too, to finally have someone by my side who understands, who wants the same things out of life that I do. People can be so strange about our choices, but I don't care. I have a second chance now, and meeting my son made me realize just how much potential there still is for love, and for healing. Update 5. Things were going well, better than I ever imagined possible. My son and I had been texting regularly, video calling every few weeks, and we'd even managed another visit before the world shut down. He was opening up more, asking deeper questions about my past, and I felt like we were slowly building something real. My wife was supportive, understanding how much this meant to me, and life felt stable for the first time in decades. Then everything changed in a single phone call. It was a Tuesday evening when my ex-wife called, her voice shaking in a way I hadn't heard since our worst fights years ago. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need to tell you something about your son," she said, and my blood went cold. I immediately thought the worst, an accident, illness, something terrible. But what she told me was different, and in some ways, harder to process. My son had been asking more questions about me lately, not just casual ones, but pointed questions about why I really gave up my rights, what kind of person I was back then, whether I had other family. His mom had been honest but gentle, but apparently, it wasn't enough for him. He'd started digging on his own, looking me up online, trying to piece together the parts of the story she'd left out. He found some things. Old arrest records from my worst years, the bar fight that led to the restraining order, a few other incidents I'd buried deep in my memory. Nothing violent toward him or his mother, but enough to paint a picture of someone who'd been seriously unstable. He also found my father's obituary, which mentioned me by name, and somehow traced back to discover that my dad had died in prison for molesting children. "He came to us crying," my ex-wife said. "He wanted to know if you were like your father. He wanted to know if that's why I really left." My heart shattered. I'd always planned to tell him about my father eventually, when he was older, when he could understand the full context of how that abuse had shaped my early struggles. I'd never wanted him to find out this way, through cold public records and his own fearful imagination. His mother had reassured him that I'd never shown any signs of being like my father, that her concerns had been about my depression and instability, not about him being unsafe with me in that way. But the damage was done. My son was now questioning everything, whether his curiosity about me was safe, whether he should be talking to me at all. "He's scared," she continued. "But he's also angry. He feels like we all lied to him by not telling him the whole truth up front. He says he doesn't know what to believe anymore." I asked if I could talk to him, try to explain, but she said he needed time. He'd asked for a break from our contact while he processed everything. She promised to let me know when, if, he was ready to hear from me again. That was 3 months ago. The silence has been excruciating. I've written dozens of letters I'll never send, rehearsed conversations that may never happen. My wife has been my anchor through all of this, reminding me that healing isn't linear, that sometimes truth has to hurt before it can help. Last week, something unexpected happened. My ex-wife called again, but this time her voice was different, nervous, but not devastated like before. She told me that my son had been talking to a counselor at school about everything he'd learned. The counselor had apparently helped him understand that children aren't responsible for their parents' crimes, and that trauma can be passed down through generations in complex ways. "He's been asking about you again," she said. "Not angry questions this time. He wants to know what it was like growing up with your father. He wants to understand how you broke the cycle." She paused, and I could hear her taking a shaky breath. "He also asked if you'd be willing to meet with his counselor. Together. He thinks it might help him sort through his feelings about all of this." I said yes immediately, of course. But there's something else she told me that's been keeping me awake at night. Apparently, during one of their family discussions about me, my son had asked his stepdad something that caught everyone off guard. If my real dad had gotten help back then, if he'd been healthy, would you have still wanted to marry mom? It was an innocent question from a teenage boy trying to understand his place in the world, but it opened a door that his mother and stepdad hadn't really examined before. His stepdad, to his credit, was honest. He said he didn't know, that he'd fallen in love with my ex-wife partly because he wanted to help her and my son, but that if I'd been in the picture as a healthy co-parent, things would have been completely different. Now my ex-wife is questioning things she thought she'd settled years ago. She's been asking herself whether she gave up on our marriage too quickly, whether she should have fought harder to get me help instead of walking away. I can hear it in her voice when we talk. There's something unresolved there, something stirring that probably should have stayed buried. I don't know what any of this means. I'm grateful beyond words that my son wants to work through his feelings about me with professional help, and I'm hopeful that we can rebuild our connection on a foundation of complete honesty this time. But I'm also terrified about where this is all heading. My ex-wife seems to be reconsidering choices she made 15 years ago, and I can't help but wonder if my return to their lives is about to complicate things in ways none of us saw coming. The counseling session is scheduled for next week. My hands shake every time I think about it. Update 6. The counseling session didn't go at all like I expected. My son sat across from me in that small office, looking so much older than his 16 years, and for the first hour, he barely spoke. The counselor, Dr. Martinez, was skilled at drawing him out, asking gentle questions that slowly got him talking about his fears, his confusion, his anger at discovering the truth about my father. What broke my heart was hearing him say, "I keep wondering if there's something wrong with me too. Like, genetically." The counselor and I both assured him that trauma and criminal behavior aren't inherited like eye color, but I could see he was still struggling with it. By the end of the session, though, something had shifted. He looked directly at me for the first time and asked, "Do you think you would have hurt me? Back then, when you were sick?" I told him the truth. That I'd been broken, angry, and unpredictable, but never in a way that would have harmed him. That my father's sickness wasn't mine, and that the very fact I'd recognized I couldn't be a proper father was proof of that difference. He nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw a hint of relief in his eyes. We scheduled another session for 2 weeks later, but 3 days before it was supposed to happen, my ex-wife called me in a panic. Her voice was different, frantic in a way I'd never heard, even during our worst times. "He's gone," she said. "My son ran away." Apparently, he'd had a massive fight with his stepdad, something about curfew and grades and typical teenage stuff, but it had escalated when his stepdad said something about being grateful for what he has and not chasing ghosts from the past. My son had exploded, screaming that his stepdad wasn't his real father and storming out. That was 2 days ago. The police were involved, but they'd found nothing. His phone was turned off. His friends claimed they didn't know where he was, though my ex-wife suspected some of them were lying. "I think he might try to find you," she said, her voice breaking. "He took some money from his college fund, and he knows what city you live in from your letter." My blood ran cold. I live 4 hours away by bus, and the thought of my 16-year-old son traveling alone, angry and confused, terrified me. I told her I'd start looking immediately, check bus stations, places a teenager might go. But there was something else in her voice, something that made my stomach clench. After a long pause, she said, "There's something I need to tell you, about the fight with his stepdad. It wasn't really about curfew." She explained that her husband had been increasingly uncomfortable with my son's growing interest in me. He'd seen the texts we exchanged, noticed how excited my son got when talking about our calls, and it had triggered something in him. During an argument about household rules, he'd snapped and said, "Maybe you should go live with your real dad if you think he's so great. See how that works out for you." My son had shot back, "Maybe I will." His stepdad, feeling threatened and hurt, had said something he immediately regretted: "Your real dad is just a stranger who abandoned you. I'm the one who's been here every day for 14 years. That's when my son exploded and ran. I spent the entire night driving around, checking every bus station, fast food place, and park I could think of. Nothing. By morning, exhausted and desperate, I was ready to call the police when I heard a knock at my apartment door. There he was. My son. Exhausted, dirty, clutching a backpack, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever imagined. He'd somehow made it to my city, slept rough for a night, and spent hours walking around trying to work up the courage to knock. "I'm sorry," were his first words. I needed to see where you lived. To see if it felt real." I let him in, made him something to eat, and immediately called his mother to let her know he was safe. The relief in her voice was overwhelming. But then came the complicated part: what now? He didn't want to go home immediately. He was still angry with his stepdad, still processing everything about our family's tangled history. His mother and stepdad wanted to drive up immediately to get him, but he begged them to give him a day to cool off. After some discussion, we all agreed he could stay one night, on my couch, with check-ins every few hours with his parents. It was surreal, having my son in my home for the first time in his life, even under these circumstances. That evening, we talked more honestly than we ever had. He told me he felt like he was living in 2 different worlds: the safe, stable life his parents had built for him, and this other reality where he had a biological father with a dark past who'd fought to rebuild himself. He said he didn't know how to reconcile the two, or where he fit in between them. I tried to help him understand that he didn't have to choose sides, that loving his adoptive father didn't mean he couldn't be curious about me, and that being curious about me didn't mean he was being disloyal to the man who raised him. "But what if I want both?" he asked. "What if I want you to be part of my life, but I also don't want to hurt Dad, my stepdad?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was my ex-wife, and she sounded different again. Not panicked this time, but uncertain. "I need to ask you something," she said, after I told her our son was doing better. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." She paused, and I could hear her stepdad in the background, their voices raised in what sounded like an argument. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd stayed together? If you'd gotten help back then instead of everything that followed?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. My son was watching me, and I realized that whatever I said next wasn't just going to affect my ex-wife. It was going to affect everyone. I looked at my son, then at the picture of my wife on my desk, and realized that sometimes the most honest answer is also the most dangerous one. "Every day," I admitted quietly. The line went silent, and in that silence, I heard the sound of something that had been carefully built over 15 years starting to crack.